If you ever feel out of control around food, you're not alone, and you're in the right place to learn practical, no-nonsense information about why you binge and how to stop. Binge eating does not mean that something is wrong with you. It's a natural but primitive brain response that you can correct. If you're ready for change, sign up for the Brain Over Binge self-paced online course for less than $20 per month. And if you feel you need personalized support, we also offer one-on-one coaching and group coaching. To learn more, go to brainoverbinge.com/subscribe. And I hope you enjoy the show. Welcome to the Brain Over Binge podcast, where you learn a simple, brain-based approach to ending binge eating. I'm Katherine Hansen, your host, and if you're new here, I'm the author of Brain Over Binge and the Brain Over Binge Recovery Guide. My goal here on this podcast is to give you ideas and insights that you can use to end binge eating disorder, bulimia, and related struggles with food so that you can get your life back. I have an interview to share with you today with a guest who many of you may remember from previous episodes. I talked to Dr. Amy Johnson about the mind as it relates to recovering from binge eating, and I think you're going to find this conversation so helpful. We went through 5 things that minds do in basically a universal way and how these common patterns can show up in a binge eater or someone who is struggling with food. When you understand how your mind works and how your brain works, it makes it so much easier to overcome the habitual tendencies that are harming you. Amy overcame binging and bulimia in her own life, as well as severe anxiety and panic attacks, and she has now guided thousands of people around the world to freedom from those issues and from unwanted habits and unnecessary worries. I love her approach because she does not focus on what is wrong with you, but instead she explains how to tap into your innate health and resilience that's already there. I know that you'll benefit from this conversation I had with Amy. Welcome to the show, Amy.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I'm so happy you're back. This is actually the 3rd time you've been here, and I've loved our previous conversations. We've talked about overcoming intrusive thoughts. We've talked about freedom from unwanted habits. And today we're going to talk about what minds do in relationship to food struggles and binge eating and weight obsessions. If you want to learn more about Amy, you can definitely go back and listen to those 2 previous episodes. I'm going to link those in the show notes. But before we dive in today, maybe you could just update people on what you've been up to since our last show, which was about a year ago. And also, I'm really excited to hear more about your new book.
Yeah, thank you. Well, and thank you, Catherine, for reading the book ahead of time and giving me a nice endorsement. I was excited about that. So yeah, that's kind of been a lot of it in the past year. I wrote the book in the past little over a year. And this book, I feel like my last book, The Little Book of Big Change, was really specific to habits. And that was super helpful for a lot of people, and also helpful for people who didn't necessarily have a habit, because, just seeing how things work, is very helpful for us as humans. But this one, I really wanted to kind of broaden it out a bit. So it's sort of looking at, how a mind works, how our thoughts work, how our mind talks to us, even a little bit about why our brain does the stuff that it does. Because I think that, we get so caught up in that, understandably. We believe everything our mind tells us. I mean, this is something that I learned years ago from your book, it's like, oh, we don't have to take that so seriously. It's not personal. It's not a message from the universe or whatever about that we should really eat that because our brain tells us it is, So really kind of seeing, oh, there's a reason behind why thoughts are showing up the way they are and why our brain is doing some of the stuff it is. I think it just is so helpful for people to kind of just not look there, and not in a dismissive, ignore it kind of way even, but it's like, oh, that's just my mind doing what minds do. I don't have to pay attention to that. And again, I really, even as I'm saying this right now, I'm thinking of reading your book many, many years ago. And that was just, these were huge insights I got from your work. So it's kind of cool that all these years later, we're talking about it now around this book.
Yeah, absolutely. You've helped me understand how these ideas how the brain works, how the mind works. You've shown me that that doesn't just apply to binge eating and all the thoughts that surround the urges to binge, but it can apply to everything. And your work really has changed my life in that way. And I thank you for that. So I think we've both helped each other. And I think that what you bring to this conversation is going to really help people who are still in that place where they're struggling with food. And I think that learning what minds do, on a more universal level can really help you see that, wow, this doesn't have to be so personal. This isn't just me. There's nothing wrong with me. And that's just such a powerful, powerful thing. So as I said, we're going to be talking about what minds do, sort of in relationship to food, weight, binge eating. And this is related to a part of your book, which is part 2 of your book, which is, the whole book is amazing, but I really love this part. And you also did a podcast series about 5 things that minds do. And we're going to go through each of these 5 things, specifically in relationship to overcoming struggles with food. I think we'll just go ahead and dive in. Well, actually, first, do you think you could talk about why this is important as far as someone who is in a place where they're struggling with binge eating? Why is it important to learn about what the mind is doing and about these 5 things? How can people use this to get themselves out of, being stuck?
Yeah. Well, I think when we're struggling, and I remember this pretty clearly, like you just feel like you're in a battle with your own mind. I think that's probably the hardest thing about any habit or addiction is there's a part of us that totally knows better, and again, I just remember this so clearly. It was like, yes, I'm binging and I feel sick and this is horrible. But really the hardest part of it for me anyway, and I think probably for many people, is like, what's wrong with me? I know this is crazy. I don't want to be doing this. Yet at the same time, I'm super compelled to do it. And it's like the harder we fight, the harder we try to talk ourselves into like, this is crazy. Don't do it. It's day 1. You're never going to do that again. And then you just fall back into it. Your brain, your mind just feels so much stronger than what you know to be true. It's just so demoralizing. I mean, that's why I know you and I both do the work we do, because that struggle is horrible. What that is really is, like we're saying, it's like we get in there and try to fight with our experience. That's the only way you can really see to do it. You're like, what the heck? I know this is crazy. So let me just not. Let me just try this instead. I'll lock the food up. I'll do this. I'll do that. And, and then with each thing that fails, it's like, wow, how strong is my brain or that's making me do this? And that's so understandable. It's so innocent, but I think that comes from misunderstanding. That comes from our brain and our mind feeling like they are this giant monster that's so powerful and that we have no real say over. And that's just not true. That's just misunderstanding. And as we come to see, oh, this is literally just a little machine in my head, in the case of a brain, or it's little puffs of energy, it's little neurons firing in the case of thought. And it's really not powerful. It's just that I think it is. I think it's personal and I think it's powerful. Just as I say this, I'm just thinking this is exactly what Brain Over Binge is so great at. It does so much for people. So I think what it really does, to answer your question in a very long way, is it just ends the fight. And when the fight is ended, then we are healthy by nature. No one was born a binge eater, and there's no real benefit to this. Once you see around it, there's no real benefit. So it will fall away. It will fall away when we aren't fighting it.
I love that. I love all of that. I think you did an amazing job explaining how what we're going to talk about can benefit you as the listener. So we'll just dive in. And the first thing that minds do is minds worry. So just tell me about how that looks in someone who's struggling with binge eating, maybe how it looked for you, and then how learning about the mind in this way can sort of release that worry.
Yeah. So minds worry. And by worry, I mean, like, I think we all know what worry means, but really what we're talking about is our mind imagining things that are not real. I mean, it's quite literally, worry is our imagination. It is us giving all this energy, all this fear, all this attention to something that is literally just being created in our imagination. It is not a real thing at all. If it's a real thing, that's a whole different story. Sometimes things are real in our faces, but worry is not. Now, what happens is we get so immersed in our thinking and it feels so real, and it's talking about us and our weight or our habit or whatever it's talking about, that we kind of know it's not real maybe, but it doesn't matter. We're so, we're just so sucked into the story of it. So what I think, especially with worry, that's so cool to see is that our brain has evolved to worry. So, way back in the day, brains had to be very alert to any possible danger. And this was a matter of life and death for people. If there was somebody that gave you a rival tribe that gave you a dirty look, well, they might kill you for your food. So you had to be super hyper alert 200,000 years ago to potential danger. And those are the brains we have today. Like people who were very alert and could get out of the way, they passed on their genes. And now we all have brains today that are thinking what might happen, what might happen, what might happen. But we live in a world where, things happen, but we don't have threats to our survival around every corner. So what that means in terms of our habits and binge eating is it's like right now our brain is just doing what our brain thinks it needs to do to help us survive when it's worrying, when it's saying, oh no, what if you eat that later? Or what if this gets out of control? Or, whatever our mind might worry about around this habit, around any of it, it's just a machine looking out for you, thinking it's helping keep you safe. But we can see better. We can see, wow, right now, right here, there's nothing happening. So I think about like with my binge, I mean, in some ways it's almost hard to remember some of that, but this constant judging, this constant like giving myself a grade or a scale on where I was, like how long since the last binge, how bingey do I feel today when I wake up in the morning? Does this feel like a day that's going to go in a bad direction? Or do I feel strong and it's not on my mind much? But even that, even looking into all that is like bringing it into our minds and trying to control it, and worrying about it and thinking about it. So I think for us to kind of just see, wow, we're just here now. There's only now. There's only this moment. And then we have a mind that's up there talking all over the place, past and future, and what if, and if this happens, then that'll happen. And all of that, literally 100% of that is thought. None of it is relevant to you in this moment. None of it is something you need to engage with and figure out. You might. It's fine. We're human. We engage with it at times, but it is thought. We don't need it. It's not necessary. It's your brain trying to protect you in a way that you actually don't need. We have everything we need right now in real time. So that's a huge thing to see. And it helps so much when your mind's off in the past and future and making stuff up.
Yeah, I can relate to all of that. It's like at some point, people who struggle with this issue have taught their brain to focus on food, to focus on weight, to try to get things perfect, to try to control everything that goes into their mouth. And the brain just gets kind of on repeat, and your mind just keeps producing the same thoughts and keeps trying to control things and keeps, like you said, giving yourself a grade and judging everything. And the more you can step back and see, oh, wow, this is just what I've taught my brain over time. It's going to keep churning this out as long as I keep following it. But you actually can see that it's optional. You can step back and realize I'm okay in this moment. There's nothing really to worry about. And not that there aren't legitimate concerns about food and things like that. We don't want to, again, dismiss any concerns that you have, but the more you can see that your brain is producing this worry on in sort of automatic setting, the more you can get some space from it and eventually get some freedom from it.
Yeah. And I think about like times when, especially as people are finding a little freedom from their habit, starting to see, wow, maybe I won't have this forever. And it is just, habitual thought. There can be a lot of worry at those times where it's like, but what if I'm wrong? And what if it comes back? And all the, what if is the big giveaway when it comes to worry. And it's nice to see that as much as that hurts us at the time and it feels like scary and it kind of takes us away from our celebration and the peace that we're starting to feel, it truly is just your brain loving you. Like that is your brain, like just doing its job to predict what might happen. But for us to see, oh, okay, I don't have to worry about that right now. My mind might go there. My brain is designed to go there, but that's just my brain trying to keep me safe. I just think that's so big because I see a lot of people coming out of it, kind of starting to wake up to this, and then they get hit with a ton of worry about, but what if it doesn't stick?
Yeah. And I think viewing it as your brain just trying to keep you safe helps you fight it less and resist it less. Because the more we fight things and resist things, sort of the bigger they can feel. But the more you realize that, hey, it's not trying to hurt you. This is just what minds do. The more you just can relax around it a little more. Okay. So I want to go on to the next one, which is minds compare. And I think this is a big one in relation to food and weight, because there is so much comparison as far as social media and the dieting industry. And it's so easy to compare ourselves to others in the way we look, how we're eating. So can you explain this in relation to what our minds do and in, overcoming binge eating issues?
Yeah. So again, our brain is just, its whole purpose is to keep us physically alive. Like that's its number one job, is to keep us alive. And to do that, it needs to predict what might happen and protect us from it. So I love, I heard this and I put it in the book, that our brain works, it's kind of like the autocorrect on your phone. You can start to type in a word and it'll fill in the blanks. And sometimes there's hilarious like autocorrect fails. And they're like, well, that is not what I meant to say. But overall, it's a machine just trying to be super efficient and do a lot of the work for you and predict things. And that's very much how our brain works. It doesn't care so much about accuracy. So it's happy. It's fine with the fact that it worries about things that aren't actual threats. It wants to just cover its bases. It's willing to do that and have a lot of false positives in order to keep us safe. So in terms of comparison, I mean, part of what our brain is doing to be able to get enough information to predict what might happen is it's just constantly going for certainty. It's trying to figure out, okay, who are you? If you're Amy's brain or Catherine's brain, like our brain is like, okay, I know this Amy character. I'm going to figure out everything I can about her so that I know, because the more I know about her and how things go for her, the more I can predict her from future danger. So in that light, like toward that end, it's constantly comparing. It's like, before and after this and that, Amy versus Catherine, Amy versus the rest of the world, Amy now versus Amy 10 years ago, like it is just constantly doing that. And it's just a computer, that's just what it does, is it just gathers that information. And for us as humans, I mean, again, it has its purpose. Maybe it's a little overzealous and over-inclusive in what it's coming up with, but overall, we're glad it does that, because it does help keep us alive. But we just want to see that that's happening. So when our mind is constantly comparing us to other people or to how it thinks we should be, all of that is just this function of the brain. And it's just not stuff we need to take so seriously. And unfortunately, we do tend to take it pretty seriously.
Yeah, I think, again, the bottom line is kind of that nothing is wrong with you, that when your mind does this, when you find yourself comparing yourself to others in terms of anything in your life, but specifically in relation to this podcast, like food, weight, the way you look, things like that, when you find your mind going there, there's not anything wrong with you. Like, this is what minds do. Minds are constantly trying to compare. And especially because you've made food and weight very innocently a big part of your life, then that's what it's going to compare. And that's what it's going to look for, all these differences and similarities and how you're doing, and trying to judge your progress based on someone else's progress. And again, the more you can step back from that, the more you can have more peace around it and just be okay with who you are and not necessarily be always looking for other comparisons to others. So yeah, I think that's super helpful.
Yeah, like what you said about whatever's most on your mind, like whatever's just the conversation, the topic of the day or the topic of the month or year for your mind, like that's what it's going to be seeing all the time. So when you're struggling with binge eating, yes, everything you see, everything you think has to do with comparison around weight, food, how you're doing with your habit, all of that stuff. But that changes. And we all know that even if you are still struggling with your habit, your mind has had many different topics throughout the years, and it will continue to have many different topics. So even when binge eating isn't an issue for you anymore, it'll find something else, because that's just what it does. So it's so valuable to just see that. And I think especially around binge eating, I think about this. For me, the comparison, we're used to talking about comparisons with like ourselves and someone else or whatever, and that's part of it. But it's also like whenever our mind says, you shouldn't have eaten that, or this is how much you should weigh. That's our mind comparing us with how it's made up that we should be. Some completely fabricated standard that our mind has created. So it's like every judgment, every little opinion of our mind kind of is a comparison. And it's just our mind makes up these standards for how we think we should be.
Yeah, your mind is comparing you to some version of yourself when that is, again, it's optional. You don't have to be that. And the more you can see that, I just think that's really powerful. So we'll go to the next one, which is mind's problem solve, and just dive into that and tell everyone how that can help.
Yeah, this is a big one too. They all are in binge eating, but this one is like, I just remember giving so much thought to how I was going to fix this problem for myself, and I think, like I mentioned earlier, I think this is what gets us deeper and deeper into it, where we feel like we're fighting our own mind. It's so well-meaning. We just want freedom, and we know freedom's possible, but the only way we can see to get closer to freedom is that we're going to fix this problem. And by we, it means like our mind, our brain, our thoughts are going to come to work and fix this problem for us, which is so backward. It sounds so logical. And of course, that's what we would think. But again, if you look at the fact that nobody is a binge eater by nature, none of us were born doing this. It's a learned thing. It's something that we learned. So working harder and learning more, it just doesn't make sense that that's what's going to do it. It's when our mind relaxes that our freedom that's right there all the time kind of comes bouncing back. So thinking about this one, mind's problem solve in terms of binge eating, that's so probably a lot of places we could go with it, but that's the big thing that comes to mind for me is just people looking at how much time, effort, energy is being devoted to your mind trying to fix this problem for you. And what if all of that kind of gets us deeper into it? It's like, what if it's just a misunderstanding? It's just us taking our thoughts as truth. And the less we problem solve and the more we kind of relax into what's there right now, the more this habit starts to fall away.
Totally. Something that comes to mind for me is problem solving in terms of what's the next diet? What's the next way I'm going to eat that's going to fix this? What's the next strategy I'm going to use? And not that strategies don't have a place. If there's things that you do that help you, that's great. That's wonderful. Keep doing them. But I think a lot of times it does become this constant search for the thing that's going to fix you when, again, nothing is wrong with you. You have a habit, you have some intrusive thoughts, you have some unwanted feelings, behaviors, things like that, but there's nothing fundamentally wrong. So the more you're constantly trying to search for that next fix, the further you can kind of get from your innate health. Yeah, so that's really helpful, Amy. The next one I want to go to is the fourth one, and it is minds think we're never good enough. And this one I think is really big for people who struggle with food and weight because there is that constant striving to be this ideal version of yourself or to eat perfectly. So yeah, just talk about that a little bit and how people can come to see these type of thoughts differently.
Yeah, I think this is a big one. And again, from a brain perspective, like our mind is always just trying to keep us safe. Now, we are no safer if you weigh 3 or 5 pounds less or more. Like that has nothing to do with our safety. We can see that now. We know that intellectually. But from the way our brain works, it's just constantly working to try to think about, okay, what's the best, most ideal state, and it doesn't know. It's a machine. It's a computer kind of making that stuff up. So it's always telling us how to be better and what we should do. And the thing that I think is so sticky about this is that our mind kind of makes these promises that truly cannot be delivered upon. So I know I thought, and I remember, I know your book talks about this as well, that I thought, man, if I could just get this habit under control, I'll be happy for the rest of my life. Like I'll never ask for anything again, right? It's not going to work that way. But on so many levels, that's always happening, like in our mind, like, oh, this is what's going to finally do it for me. Oh no, whether it's weight loss, which is how this starts, I think for a lot of people. Oh, let me just lose some weight and then I'll feel better. Then I'll be more confident. Then I'll be happier. It just doesn't work that way. That's not where contentment and happiness and confidence come from. They are our nature. They're there when our mind is quiet. They were there in spades when we were 1 and 2 years old, before we started identifying with our mind so much. That's the only place we're going to find them in any lasting way. But you lose a little weight, you get super excited, very short term, and then your mind says, "Ooh, I know that made you feel better, so let's go for a little bit more." And before you know it, you're caught up in something. So just to see that that's the promises that our mind gives us about, do this and accomplish this, and then you'll be happy. I think we all know it's very cliche, but it just can't be said enough. Like it's not a winnable game at all.
Yeah, it's such a helpful point, because I'm sure anyone listening can relate to getting to your ideal weight, or what you think is your ideal weight, or eating the diet that you think is ideal and still feeling like you're not good enough. And it's just like you said, what minds do. And the more you can see that, the more you can free yourself from that constant cycle of striving for some ideal that you're never going to actually reach. So I think that's super helpful. So let's go to the last one, which is minds dramatize.
Yeah. So this one is funny. I like this one because as I wrote about, like it's sticky. It's almost like our mind is so dramatic in how it narrates things at times, yet it's also really good at just passing that off as if it's true. So our mind's not in there like being the narrator. I mean, it is in there being the narrator, but it's not revealing itself as the narrator. We just go through life hearing our own thoughts and just thinking we're just feeling life, So in the case of binge eating, it's like things are so, I just remember this myself too, like, oh my gosh, it mattered so much what you ate for a meal, or if I would eat, a little bit past full, like I ruined something. And then of course, an hour later I'd be binging, and it's like, okay, well then what was all that worry about? But you can just see and feel, and again, this is, I think, what's so painful about it in some ways is, it's not logical. It doesn't make sense to be super restrictive one day and then later that night be in a binge. Like there's just nothing that feels true and right about that. And if we can see that that's what we're talking about, that's a mind being super black or white, super dramatic about things. And it's easy to miss that, ironically, even though what we're talking about is, exaggeration and drama. It's been going on in our heads for so long, and our mind's really good at bringing in evidence and telling why it's so important that it's kind of easy to miss.
Yeah, I love the example of worrying so much about what you're going to eat at a meal. And if you think about how many meals you're going to have in your lifetime, rationally that it's not that important. It doesn't matter that much, but the mind will spin it as if it is all that matters. And I think, yeah, it's just really helpful to see that. And also the number on the scale is another one that comes up for me. It's just a number, rationally it's not going to affect your life or what you can accomplish. And you probably can relate to that as well.
Yeah. I mean, and it really does tell this story. It feels as if it matters. Like, I don't know how else to say it. It feels as if it really, really matters. Like you're somehow less of a person or all of that. And it just can't. And it's interesting to see. I think it's fascinating to look at other points in your life when the same thing has happened and it didn't impact you. Like it's all so very relative, and it's all about your mind in a moment. So one weight, could be, you could be jumping up and down about that weight. And, a couple months later, you could be super depressed about that weight. Like, who's making this up? Where's the scale? Like, well, there's no objectivity at all in this. It is so just incredibly subjective and made up by our minds. And it's just good to be on to that. It doesn't mean that we're not talking about, getting ourselves to think a certain way or be okay with a certain way. You don't have to be okay with any of it, but it's super helpful to see, okay, when I'm not okay with it, that's just my mind. It's just thoughts saying this, it's just thoughts making up how much I should weigh. It's like, you might be really uncomfortable with your weight. You might hate anything about your life. But if you can see, okay, my dislike of this is coming through an incredibly biased filter. It's just my mind telling me how I should be, arguing with reality. I think that's super helpful because it's like, oh, okay, I still don't like it, but I'm on to it.
Yeah. Because we're not saying you can never work toward change or that you have to just be okay with any weight and you just should eat whatever. And, we do believe in taking care of yourself, but you can do that in a way that's not filled with all this drama. So those are the 5 things. And I definitely encourage you to listen to Amy's podcast. She had a podcast episodes for each of these 5 things. And also it's part 2 of her book, and her book is called Just a Thought. And before we wrap up today, Amy, is there anything else that a mind does, talking about food, weight, body issues, binge eating, that people should be aware of, and just to know that it's normal? And when we say normal, it doesn't mean, again, that you have to like it, but it's just what minds do. Are there any other areas that you want to point out to people?
I mean, I think the biggest thing overall to kind of see about this is that it's a machine. It's just a machine, and it works in a machine-like way. It's trying to be incredibly efficient. It's incredibly consistent. That's why we all have a million habits, good and ones that we would call bad. But it's not us. It's just the way that this machine works. It's going to always work that way to some degree, but we can come to see that we aren't it. So forever, your mind will problem solve and compare and do those things. But it's really, really possible to have that going on and to be able to see, oh, thanks, mind, but that doesn't make sense. That doesn't resonate with me. There's a you in there seeing all this happening, watching it all play out. And that's where our freedom is.
Yeah, to see that you don't have to get caught up in that drama, in the worry, in the problem solving and comparing. And not that you're always going to see it, and not that you're always going to have that distance from it, but the more you open yourself up to knowing what the mind does, the less you'll get caught up in it. And the more you feel like you're making choices in your life that feel good to you without constantly being sort of drug around by the brain. I feel like that was the whole experience of being a binge eater. I felt so at the mercy of my brain, of my thoughts, of my obsessions. I just didn't feel like I could control it. But once I saw, hey, this isn't me, then suddenly I got that control back. And I know you kind of experienced a similar thing.
Yeah. And I think I remember reading Brain Over Binge and you talking about almost being excited for an urge to come along because you were seeing it differently. And I think there's something really important here too, that of course, understandably, when we're really in this habit and we're trying to get out of it, all we want is to never feel an urge again. We don't want a thought about weight. We don't want a thought about food. We just want it all to go away. And just to start to open up to see that's fine to want that, but that's not really the way it works. And it doesn't have to work that way. We can be totally free and at peace and know who we are and just feel grounded in that with anything showing up. That is real freedom. I mean, to this day, I haven't binged in, 10 years or more, right around 10 years, I think. And my mind will still occasionally have some of the thoughts that it had 10 years ago because it's a machine, and it learned that, and it thought it was keeping me safe. And now it's just oh, wow, isn't that interesting? So I just want people to know that too, that I know you talk about this all the time, that it's not about having freedom from all this stuff. There is no problem. Our mind is doing what it's doing exactly as it should be. We just want to see, oh, okay, this isn't me, and I can be free even with this showing up.
Absolutely. And it applies to so many areas of life. And I find myself using this stuff all the time, when I find myself getting dramatic or comparing, and I'm like, oh, that's just what my mind is doing. And you get caught up in it for a little while. But when you step back and you remember what you know about the mind, it's just really powerful. And I love your work, and I hope everybody will get your book, Just a Thought. And just thank you so much for being here, Amy.
Thank you so much for having me.
I appreciate everyone who listened to this conversation, and I hope you took away a lot of useful insights. I also hope you'll join me again next time. And as always, I want to encourage you and remind you that you have the power to change your brain and live a binge-free life. The Brain Over Binge podcast is produced and recorded by Brain Over Binge Recovery Coaching, LLC. All work is copyrighted by Brain Over Binge Recovery Coaching, LLC, and all rights are reserved. As a disclaimer, the host of the Brain Over Binge podcast are not professional counselors or licensed healthcare providers, and this podcast is not a substitute for medical advice or any form of professional therapy. Eating disorders can have serious health consequences, and you are strongly advised to seek medical attention for matters relating to your health. Please get help when you need it, and good luck on your journey. Need more help? You can find all of our current and upcoming options for support at brainoverbinge.com.